Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Indie Reads Aloud. Today we have an adult reader coming all the way from Sydney, Australia. I cannot tell you how excited I am about this. This is so cool that we can listen to an author's book from the other side of the planet. This is so much fun for me. I know, guys, I'm still 6 years old. It's okay. Today, Jennifer Rains is going to be joining us. And there she is. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone.
I'm so glad you're here. As I said, I'm so excited. I could sit and talk to you for hours, and maybe you'll come back in the autumn for our Conversations podcast, and we'll have that discussion. Today, though, we're going to focus on a reading from your book, Taylor's Law, which is a contemporary romance. But before you begin, I want to give people a little bit of your backstory and tell people a little bit about you. Jennifer Rains writes contemporary romances set mainly, but not exclusively, in Australia. Think Malta, Finland, New Zealand, or maybe someplace else. A dreamer and an optimist, her stories are a delicious cocktail of mutual respect, passion, and loyalty because she still believes in happy ever afters. Jennifer lives in inner city Sydney, Australia, with the requisite number of partners, that would be one, and animals, and that would be two. Her desk overlooks a park which nourishes her soul when she raises her head from her keyboard. She gets some of her best ideas during long yin yoga poses or walking anywhere. While Jennifer adores historical romance, she chose to write contemporary because she thought, maybe wrongly, that it needed less research while she was holding down a full-time job. I'm guessing, Jennifer, that you discovered research was still a thing.
Research is still a thing.
That's what I thought. So, today she's going to be reading Taylor's Law. Ella Anderson adores her niece. Despite struggling to make ends meet, accepting her dying sister's request to raise Tessa as her own is a no-brainer, until she receives a summons from a legal Goliath on behalf of a wealthy stranger claiming paternity and, potentially, custody of her child. Jake Taylor has been ripped off one too many times, yet the letter from a woman claiming his cousin fathered her child feels real. His aunt and uncle are desperate for a grandchild. When the child's aunt shows up in his office in place of the child's mother, he smells fraud. Secrets and lies bubble to the surface, threatening Ella and Jake's growing attraction. In a minefield of divided loyalties, can Ella trust Jake to make the right decision about custody of Tessa? This sounds like a really cool story. I am excited to hear some of this. I understand you're going to start reading chapter 1 for us today, Jennifer?
Yes, I'll start at the beginning. A good
I
place.
love beginnings, those are the best. When you are ready, please take the microphone and read aloud.
Thank you. Taylor Law. Ella Anderson exited the train station, her gaze captured by the imposing glass and chrome high-rise squatting diagonally opposite. She pressed a hand to her nervous stomach. The few mouthfuls of dry toast she'd forced herself to swallow at breakfast refused to settle. The stylish sign mounted on the front of the building on the other side of the concourse left no room for doubt. Taylor Law. A prestigious location and a blatant statement of wealth and power. Ridiculous to think a building could gleam malevolently, but in the weak rays cast by an autumnal sun, it looked as menacing as it had 8 years ago. Ella had first-hand experience of the company's ruthlessness. Taylor Law had represented the crook who'd legally swindled prime farmland from her father. Her sworn statement about the verbal agreement and handshake between the two men had counted for nothing. The icy dread that had seeped into her bones when she'd learned of this appointment returned. She shivered. Wealth bought power. To hell with justice. Releasing the hand of her curly-haired niece, Ella scooped the toddler high in her arms and smiled at Tessa's delight. That's my girl. She blew noisy kisses on the bridge of Tessa's nose before settling the giggling child on her hip. With a conscious straightening of her spine, she navigated her way through the throngs of Monday morning tourists crisscrossing the foreshore concourse. 9:15 was too early for workers to emerge from their offices for a coffee break. Perfect timing for carefree travellers to head to the ferry wharves for the tourist destinations on Sydney Harbour. Taronga Park Zoo, Manly Beach, or Watson's Bay. Their easygoing laughter was a sharp contrast to her edgy apprehension. Within minutes, she'd walked out of the brisk wind through automatic entrance doors to the lobby. Quieter here, away from the noise of the street, but the marble tiles were equally formidable, symbolising clarity and control when she had neither. She'd come to this meeting in place of her sister, Chrissy, who could no longer attend anything. Ella swallowed the lump of tears in her throat. A command, she'd hardly call it an invitation, from Jacob Taylor, who wasn't just any lawyer. He carried the building's name. The letter had been in the innocent-looking pile of mail she'd collected from her neighbour when she'd returned from the family farm to the apartment last night. As Chrissy's executor, she'd opened the letter addressed to her sister, the weight of the stiff cream parchment ominous even before she read the missive. The company name in bold print and the typed blunt sentence stating the time and place for this meeting had confused her. The next paragraph mentioned Drew Browning, paternity and custody in carefully crafted sentences, an implied threat that had left her struggling to breathe. Custody. Entering the elevator, she let Tessa press the button for the 10th floor. Sliding the child to the ground, she took her hand, smooth, silent, fast. The glass cube rose through the centre of the building. A disembodied elevator voice announced each floor. 3, then 7, then 9, cutting her connection to her own world with breathtaking speed. The doors opened into a foyer 3 times the size of her office in the community justice centre she managed, and was more opulent than a 5-star hotel. The ripe fragrance of oriental lilies was another assault on her senses. "Can I help you?" inquired the elegant blonde perched behind an oversized reception counter. The crimson and white lilies spilled from the vase on her right, plucked of their stamen, presumably to prevent the sticky orange anthers from staining the countertop and marring the perfect image being created. The company name was emblazoned on the reception wall in letters half Ella's height. "Miss Anderson, to see Mr. Taylor." She'd only explained Chrissy's absence once. She didn't have the strength for more. Every bone and muscle in her body ached at the injustice of Chrissy's early death. Saying, "My sister is dead," offended her sense of right and wrong, the words becoming harder, not easier, with each retelling. "Please take a seat, Miss Anderson." The woman gestured towards the oxblood Chesterfield positioned against the opposite wall. The colour seemed fitting for this antechamber to hell. "I'll let Mr. Taylor know you've arrived." The firm instructions reinforced all of Ella's impressions. Power, the word reverberated through her head. Drew Browning, a man whose name didn't appear on Tessa's birth certificate and whom Chrissy had never named, had hired Taylor Law to represent him. Potential father. He was a stranger to Tessa, to Ella and her family. Choosing Taylor Law to represent him was a brutal demonstration. He had the money and power to buy the result he wanted. Panic rose like bile in her throat. She dropped onto the couch, settling Tessa beside her. Oodles. Tessa reached out a hand, her grey gaze full of trust. Ella knew zilch about genetics, but no one in her immediate family had grey eyes. She pulled a soft bear with a chewed ear from her bag. Here's Tootles, and wished for her own brown bear to stand sentinel at her shoulder during this meeting. Tessa began a private and unintelligible conversation with the raggedy toy, while Ella leaned back against the expensive leather. A false comfort. This time yesterday, her path had been clear, raising Tessa as if she were her own child because she loved her. She'd promised Chrissy to give her niece the best upbringing she could. Ella had never questioned the rightness of it. Tessa was the child of her heart, her nurturing love built on a million small memories, bathing Tessa when she was a baby, sharing meal times, comforting her when she was teething, and waiting to give her a hug when she let go of the security of the coffee table to take her first steps. When Chrissy's health stopped her from doing simple tasks, Ella had accepted she'd be a single parent. You can go in now, Miss Anderson. Ready or not, here I come. The words from a children's game echoed in her mind. She had no idea what had precipitated this meeting, but her need to know outweighed the anxiety pounding at her temples, outweighed her concern at bringing Tessa. With a regular sitter unavailable and the doctor's advice to keep the toddler close until she established new routines, her options had shrunk to zero. Tessa. She waited while the child scrambled off the sofa, the bear clutched in one hand. She held out her hand and the child took it. The secretary threw the panelled peak door wide. A sense of unreality swept over Ella as she approached the door. Today, Tessa might have a father. Dear heaven. She struggled to get her head around the idea. An absent, anonymous man who'd abandoned Chrissy, a man Ella and her family hadn't factored into Tessa's upbringing. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the lion's den. Two men, where Ella had expected one lawyer, dressed in stylish, dark worsted suits, crisp business shirts and silk ties, stood when she entered. They'd been sitting in low, burnished gold leather armchairs, but broke off their conversation to rise at her arrival. The similarity between them ended there. Her attention skittered away from the face of the older man. She assumed he was the lawyer, Jacob Taylor. Her quarry became the younger man who'd stepped towards her. With his body encased in a minimalist form-fitting Levan suit, he looked as sleek and lethal as a bullet. His face could have been carved from marble, classic lines, strong bones, and a determined chin. The russet brown hair pulled back into a stubby ponytail and the gold stud in his right ear shattered his veneer of sophistication. A pirate king. The friendly interest she'd programmed herself to display at this meeting evaporated as their eyes met and held. His steel grey gaze probed deeply, demanding access to her closest held secrets. Her instinct to share was physically and emotionally shocking. This close, his subtle scent, sandalwood with a dash of something spicy, teased her nostrils, undermining her resistance and offering a giddy temptation she struggled to understand. Her greeting caught in her throat, and she took a step back, her nerves stretched tight, her body responding to him even as the blazing intelligence concentrated on her shifted into suspicion. She couldn't look away. "Who are you?" he demanded. The tension in his liquid chocolate voice rippled through her. This man couldn't be Tessa's father. The ferocity of her denial rattled her. Every cell refused to accept he'd been her sister's lover. And some remnant of reasoned thought nagged at her. He'd have eaten Chrissy alive. Eleanor Anderson. With an effort, she gathered her professional poise. Chrissy's sister, Ella. You must be Drew. She reached out a hand. You know damn well I'm not Drew. If you aren't Drew, who are you? Off-balanced by his instant attack, she tried to steady her jumping nerves. Withdrawing her hand, she turned to the older man who was staring at Tessa. Mr. Taylor, your letter requested Chrissy meet you here about Drew Browning's paternity and... She stumbled to a halt over the word custody, then shook her head as a bizarre idea formed. You can't be Drew. I'm his father, Peter. His presence confused her further, but confirmed the identity of the pirate king. She stretched out a hand for a second time. Then you must be Mr. Taylor. Good morning. Where's Chrissy? Taylor demanded. Before she could answer, Tessa's soft voice ricocheted around the room. Mama's in heaven. Ella gathered Tessa into her arms, hugging her tightly. She buried her nose against the child's neck to hide the tears threatening to spill over. That's right, my darling, she crooned. Mama had to go away. You must be devastated, said Peter gently. A sudden accident? An illness. Ella responded to his genuine sympathy. After a country funeral, sympathy was familiar territory. She'd learned to handle well-wishers from near strangers. We should have acted faster. Peter turned to the silent lawyer. Taylor monitored her every move, cataloguing her sins. Chrissy didn't say she was sick, did she? When did she die? 10 days ago, Ella said, the longest 240 hours of Ella's life. I'm sorry I didn't meet her. If we hadn't delayed, his distress obvious, Peter glanced at Jacob Taylor. I don't know when Drew employed Taylor Law, but Chrissy wasn't often conscious in her final days, Ella admitted. Those relentless days when hope was gone and her sister's spirit had unwound like the spring in an old-fashioned timepiece. You wouldn't have been able to question her. You've misunderstood. Jake's representing my wife and I. Peter stared at Tessa, where her head rested against Ella's shoulder. And this is Tessa. His voice softened, his mouth stretching into a smile as he studied the little girl. Oodles fell, said Tessa. Peter swooped to pick up the toy and handed it to her. Miss Anderson, Eleanor. Call me Ella, she said automatically, while she struggled to fit this new piece of the jigsaw into any kind of coherent picture. I don't understand. The letter mentioned Drew Browning. Please sit down. Peter Browning opened his arms in welcome. Taking a steadying breath, Ella scanned the sparse but elegantly furnished room, choosing the two-seater sofa, leaving the armchairs for the pirate lawyer and Tessa's grandfather. Peter's presence reminded her there were other players in family disputes. A mistake not to anticipate who might be present today. She settled Tessa beside her, placing her bag on the low central table. A single bark-to-bark piece of cedar, prized in her stretch of country above all other timbers. Beautiful, rare, and very valuable. A timely reminder she'd entered an alien universe. Presumptive grandfather, not father, had chosen wealth and power to guard his back. What the hell was going on? Tessa tucked Toodle safely between them, even her childish instincts recognising danger and seeking to protect. Ella rubbed Tessa's cheek and patted the bear. "How can we help you?" Jacob Taylor interrupted. "I received your summons less than 18 hours ago," but Ella's mind still whirled with the speed of having her world tipped on its axis. "Chrissy asked me for this meeting." "I don't understand." Ella fell off the edge of a cliff she hadn't seen coming. Taylor's words tipping her into a spinning vortex. She turned to the older man. "Your son didn't initiate this?" Her voice cracked, her vision blurred. Eleanor, are you okay? Can I get you a drink?" "Tea, coffee, water?" Peter's face held concern. Returning her gaze to Taylor, her mouth went dry. More than wealth and power, a history of ruthless elimination of opponents. Any sign of weakness on her part would be an open invitation to take advantage of her. "Chrissy, what didn't you tell me?" "I don't think I'll be here long enough for a cup of tea, but thank you." "What don't you understand?" Taylor studied her with the intensity of a lepidoprotist examining an exotic butterfly on the end of a pin. "I assume Drew contacted you," Ella said. Maybe he'd heard from a mutual friend that Chrissy was dying. Maybe he'd finally bothered to check if there'd been any consequences of his relationship with Chrissy. "Drew's not in Australia. London's not another planet." She was babbling, trying to distract them both. "You know Drew's in London?" Taylor pounced on her admission. "Chrissy said he was. He followed his blog with the dedication of a true fan, and she'd never once mentioned he was a lover." Ella listened with half an ear to her sister's gushing adoration and never guessed he was Tessa's unnamed father. Did that make her gullible or an idiot? Or had she been selfishly content when Chrissy insisted Tessa was hers alone and she wanted Ella to look after her when Chrissy died? "Chrissy knew some of the people he wrote about. I had no idea they had any kind of personal relationship until I saw your letter." "Yet you assumed I was Drew?" Taylor challenged. "Based on your age." Ella hadn't anticipated the direction of the conversation, leaving her floundering. "Celebrity gossip doesn't interest me, and essentially he's a gossip columnist." Why had her father contacted Jacob Taylor, of all the lawyers on the planet? And why hadn't she told Ella? "You didn't check what he looks like?" "No, I had other priorities last night." Ella hadn't cared until he was linked to Chrissy in Taylor's letter. Disbelief had pinned her to a chair until a desperate anxiety had driven her to check her niece was safely asleep. She'd stayed to keep guard, fighting sleep as long as she could. In her dreams, she was arguing with a faceless lawyer. She insisted she had custody of Tessa. He laughed and said, "You have nothing in writing." She'd woken, dripping with sweat. "I ran out of time this morning." She straightened Tootles in her niece's slackening grip. Taylor's penetrating gaze narrowed in speculation. When I received her letter, I talked to Peter. Not Drew? His hesitation gave Ella a possible answer to the question most necessary for her sanity. Drew denies paternity. The older man interrupted. When Jake told me, I asked him to arrange a meeting. Why did you agree to a meeting, Mr. Taylor, if Drew denies the claim? This isn't about me. Taylor waved an impatient hand. What do you want? I want to see Chrissy's letter to you. To know what Chrissy asked for, what she offered in return. Then I'll wake up and discover this is all a bad dream. Why? Because I only have your word that she wrote to you, was the answer Ella ached to give. But she had no power in this place. She was the supplicant. Your letter mentioned custody. She licked her dry as a dirt bowl lips. Chrissy lived with me. As you can imagine, I talked to her often about Tessa's upbringing. I'd like to confirm if her letter to you is consistent with our conversations. She asked for money. Lots of money, he replied. Ella's brain simply shut down. Dear heaven, lots of money? Blackmail is an unpleasant business. Taylor seemed to relish the accusation. Chrissy was dying, not a criminal. Terrified was a better description. Adrenaline surged through Ella's system and she welcomed the anger. You're twisting her meaning. Seeking child support isn't blackmail, it's a child's right. She'd explained the concept more times than she could count to absent fathers resentful of their obligations. Working alongside the community justice centre lawyers brought her into daily contact with family disputes. Tessa tugged on her hand. Oodles doesn't like fighting. We're not fighting, darling. Ella ran her fingers up and down Tessa's back in a soothing manner, though she needed the contact more than the child. She met Taylor's smoky stare over the child's head. Her outburst hadn't tempted him to hand over Chrissy's letter. It was the claim for cash in exchange for custody. Stop upsetting Tessa, Jake, and look at her. I have a photo at home that could be her twin. The family resemblance is uncanny. Peter beamed. A physical resemblance isn't enough. Jacob Taylor's unreadable stare rested on her niece, and Ella held her breath. At its heart, this is a paternity claim issued more than 2 years after the event. Bron will love her, Peter said simply. Ella was lost, but the words had a powerful effect on Taylor. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes in sharper relief before he shook off whatever emotion had battered him. We need to fully investigate, he insisted. That's your job. Ella, do you believe your sister? Peter asked. The direct question had Ella reassessing him. Grey hair and a heavily lined face gave the impression life hadn't always been easy for Peter Browning, but the glint lighting his eyes suggested he'd lived, loved, and survived with his sense of humour intact. Under her intent examination, his smile broadened. After reading and rereading Taylor's letter, when she couldn't pretend it was some kind of macabre joke, she'd scoured her memory for any references Chrissy had made to Drew. She'd recalled offhand comments and unfinished sentences starting with Drew said or Drew wanted, and was amazed at her blindness in not working it out for herself. Combined with her sister's direct approach to Taylor law, they added up to a plain truth. With her heart pounding, she said, if Chrissy said Drew is Tessa's father, then he is.
Thank you so much. Wow. Okay, so one of the best things about this podcast for me is that I get to grow my TBR pile. So thank you for adding yet another book to my list.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. What was your favorite part about writing this book?
It was an experiment, actually. For the first time ever, I started a series. And so this is book one of two. And I'd
Okay.
never done that. And I was exploring kind of ideas and how to set it up so that book two could follow in a way, and have a common theme, which was that swindle that I mentioned at the beginning, the
Sure.
swindling of the father that set up quite different passions of the two daughters that survived. And so just working it out, I do just love those moments when you're lost in words, though, when hours pass and you sit up at the end of it and you think, I did well.
Yes, yes. But the puzzle of it is a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. I'm so glad you were on the program today. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. I hope you'll come back and read again for us in the future.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'd love to.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening or morning, I suppose. Morning.
Morning. It's mid-morning here.
How wonderful. Technology is an amazing thing. Thank you so much for coming, and I look forward to hearing you read again.
Thank you.